Everybody's got a price, it's the $1 million man. Podcast in demand. Understand, everybody's got a price. $1 million man. Everybody's got a price. $1 million man. Everybody's got a pod, it's the $1 million man. Podcast in demand. Understand, everybody's got a price. $1 million man. Everybody's got a price.
What's up, everybody? It's Marcus D'Angelo, and we are back for another episode of Everybody's Got a Pod. And of course, I could never do it without the man himself, WWE Hall of Famer, the $1 million man, Ted DiBiase. Ted, what's going on, brother?
Not a whole lot, but I mean, I think you said that wrong because I couldn't do this without you. I'm telling you. But no, it's it's a good day. It's a pretty day here in Mississippi, and let's do this thing.
Yeah, man. Hey, the pleasure's all mine every week getting to sit down and pick your brain. And this week we've got a really fun, interesting topic because as this podcast comes out, we'll be just a couple days away from the 40-year anniversary of one of the most infamous incidents in wrestling history, July 1984, when Vince McMahon acquired the WTBS time slot and showed up there on TV in Georgia on a day that's now referred to as Black Saturday in wrestling.
Okay, 84, 54, 64, 74, 8. I was 30 years old.
That's right. Yeah, you would have been exactly 30
years old. 40 years later, I'm 70 years old.
And man, it's a lot of the people who listen to my other podcasts are going to know that I've covered this with Gerald Briscoe on Jake's podcast when he filled in. Then I recently covered it with Jake, because he was there in Georgia as well. So now we're going to get your take on it. So I'm excited to do kind of like this kind of crossover and really sort of get the full story between yourself, Jake, and Gerald. So yeah, I think our listeners have got something to be really excited about. But before we get into it, I do want to tell our listeners that this Saturday, July 13th, I'm making my debut with International Wrestling Cartel here in Pittsburgh as a backstage correspondent. And I cannot wait to be part of the show. I'd love for all of you to check out what IWC has to offer.
Look at that bad guy.
Look at this guy. See, I've got the scowl going on. I had to look cool for this.
Yeah.
And, look, guys, if you're in Pittsburgh, the surrounding area, please try to get to the IWC Wipeout pay-per-view in Elizabeth, Pennsylvania. It's at Mark's Court time. And if you can't be there in person, go to Triller TV and watch there. And I will put the links for tickets and for Triller TV in the description of this show. So, all right, Ted, with that, I do want to jump into these notes. There's plenty to talk about here with Black Saturday. And we're gonna reverse the clock 2 years to really kind of get the full story, though. In 1982, when Vince Jr. took over the WWF from Vince Sr., the territory system was still alive and well, and the promoters operated on the understanding that each territory was independent. The other members of the National Wrestling Alliance would honor one another's territories and not work in it, promote, try to take wrestlers from it, etc. And Vince Jr. would separate from the NWA and go independent with Titan Sports. So, Ted, you had been with the WWF in 1979, as we discussed on one of our early episodes. And you had gotten to know Vince Jr. during that time. So I say all that to say, it makes me wonder, did you ever imagine that he'd become the force of nature in wrestling that he would go on to become?
Well, I mean, I don't know that anybody ever, at that moment or at that time thought that was going to happen. I remember that he went to all the promoters in the country of all of the territories and basically offer them the opportunity to come on board with him and be a part of it. And of course, he probably knew in advance that most of those people weren't going to do it.
And I have to ask, before he began making the steps to make the WWF a household name, would you say that the wrestlers viewed that territory, New York, because of guys like Bruno and superstar Billy Graham, was New York viewed as kind of the ultimate place to go and work?
I guess some might say that, obviously, if you're in a territory that's, one of your, one of your venues is Madison Square Garden. Yeah.
Vince branching off from the NWA is interesting because a lot of folks viewed the NWA at this time as being similar to kind of like the mafia, with like a lot of power brokers in wrestling who made all these kind of backroom deals, including what territory was going to have the champion. And by the way, the WWF would never get a recognized NWA champion in their territory, which may well have played a part in Vince wanting to separate himself from the NWA. It's a real like kind of shots fired thing, and him leaving the NWA when the NWA is viewed as this kind of infallible entity is it's pretty unique. I mean, how much did you know at the time about the NWA and their
Well,
influence
the
overall?
NWA, I just knew that the NWA of all of was the. It's kind of like when you went to work in New York, they had their world champion. Well, their world champion was only. It was only recognized on the East Coast, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you went to work for Vern Gagne, he had his own what was that? What do you call him? The AWA?
AWA champion,
the AWA World Heavyweight Champion, and then you had but of all those belts, the one that was most recognized was the NWA because the NWA. It was the largest. It had the most territories. I mean, it's kind of like, and hey, look, Bill did the same thing. Bill pulled out of the NWA, and made his own champion.
Man, to this day, that NWA championship, the 10 pounds of gold, it's still something that it's viewed in this really respected light. One of the guys who's training me in wrestling actually got to referee a match with the current champion, EC3, who has that 10 pounds of gold belt. And he said, like, just getting to hold that belt and hold it up was like a huge honor for him as a referee. It's like, man, that belt is still to this day very revered.
Well, with all due respect, there's not there's not an independent wrestler out there right now that, in my opinion, has the talent or the savvy to carry that belt. Brother, I mean, that was the belt. And as NWA champion, world champion, you went territory to territory defending that belt.
Yep.
There was no other, in other words, the WWF was just a territory, but the NWA was a group of territories, but that are which now Vince McMahon has said, God bless you. You want to keep doing your own thing, go ahead, but I'm coming. I'm going to come to your cities. I'm going to bring my own show. I'm going to bring my own crew, and that's it. And so, it was time to make a choice, and you had to make a choice.
So Vince's next big move was to acquire the Southwest Championship Wrestling time slot with USA, which was made possible because the Blanchards couldn't afford the $7,000 per week asking price from the network, despite having excellent ratings on their TV. And the promotion would fold completely in 1985. Moves like this are ultimately what killed the territories. Did you see what wrestling was getting set to become as these smaller territories are being kind of devoured? Or were you still optimistic that business would just continue on as it always had in wrestling?
Well, I did, it took me a while to understand what was happening, that Vince was basically taking over the country. My ace in the hole though was Japan.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't care. I mean, I could have said no to Vince, and I could have said no to Crockett, and I could have just like Japan, go to Japan, do my tour, go home for a couple of weeks, go back and do it again, and my pay.
Mm-hmm.
Man. Even in today's economy, $1,000 a day is a lot of money.
Oh yeah.
And that's what I was making. If I went on a 3-week tour, that's 21 days. That's 21 grand. And the other, again, because the reason I keep questioning myself is, and the other thing is, like, you can't get double taxed. You understand?
Yeah.
But according to the deal with Japan, Japan paid Japan paid Japan my tax. Okay. So basically, when I came back to the United States, I've already paid the tax in Japan, and they're not going to double tax you. So my tax in the United States is going to be lower than normal. But of course, what the United States doesn't know is that Japan paid my tax. So I didn't actually pay it. They did.
Despite the fact that you're set up over there in Japan and you've got all these options, you are a second generation wrestler and you grew up in wrestling, you grew up in the territory system. So looking back on it now with perspective, do you resent Vince's moves that put an end to the territories as you knew it? Or do you respect the fact that, he bet on himself and he won big time?
Well, yeah, I respect that. I mean, okay, Marcus, I never in my wildest dream envisioned that one day I could walk into Walmart and see an action figure and it's me.
Yeah.
I mean, never. I mean, what Vince McMahon did, he took wrestling. I mean, wrestling back then, territory days, wrestling was kind of like a blue collar crowd form of entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
Vince McMahon took wrestling and made it mainstream. You didn't see a lot of khaki pants and polo shirts at ringside in wrestling until Vince took it and went with it. It's like sometimes I'll be honest with you. I think wrestling would have died. I think it would have died because there was right now. Think of how many things there are to, different directions you can go in terms of entertainment.
Oh man,
there's so much out there now that in terms of where you can spend your entertainment dollar. And pro wrestling, pro wrestling was pro wrestling started in the carnivals. You knew that, didn't you?
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's why wrestlers speak Carney.
Carney and call everybody Marks, just like a carnival person would. Yeah. So yeah, man.
He is Yizor Niazang.
Is that what is your name?
Yep.
See, now that I'm training in wrestling, I'm starting to learn Carney. It comes naturally. But no, and I think you make a good point. Probably like guys who are, territory journeymen, they'd probably look at Vince now and say like, man, fuck that guy. He ruined wrestling, all that stuff. But a guy like you or a guy like Jake, guys who are the beneficiaries of what Vince had done and are still beneficiaries today as they're producing action figures. Kind of hard to resent the move, right?
I'll tell you the one thing. Here's the thing, though. And this is the negative. When you were a young guy, I grew up in the wrestling business, and so for me to get in was not a hard thing to do, But back in the day, it was kind of like unless somebody took you under wing, it's like it was very protected, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that what went away was, in my opinion, the breeding ground disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
What better way to learn your trade than to do it every night in front of a live crowd? You're just you're not on the big shows. You're in all of the little towns on the first match until you get your feet wet, and they gradually advance you. But that's how we used to learn this business. Get in the ring and do it.
Yep. There
were no schools. There were no and even now when I go down to and I've been down to Orlando a couple times. And and they're training those guys. They're training them the right way. They're learning how to do the stuff, but they only have the opportunity to wrestle in front of a live crowd once a week, I think.
Yeah.
Like on a Saturday or a Sunday or maybe two days. I don't know, but that ain't enough. Because that's where you learn. And with all the territories, a young guy could go. It's like, I started for Bill. The first. The summer between my sophomore and junior year in college, I was a referee in the Amarillo territory. You learn a whole lot by being the third man in the ring. You do, because you can hear everything. You can hear them talking, and you begin to see the psychology, and that was gone. And so then when I went to work the next summer, when Dick Murdoch said, "Hey, I'm going to work for Bill Watts in Mid-South," he says, maybe I can get you booked and you can start. And that's what I did. He started me, I had, at that time, I had no real experience, just, put the tights on, get in the ring, and except that I had grown up in the business, and I knew the fundamentals, and we went from there. But that's where I learned, and because you could be in the ring with an old timer and he'd say, "Okay, let's sit here for a while and make them hungry." And then he started moving everything. "Okay, we're going, here they come. Here they come. Here they come." That's fine. Funny the things I remember sitting here.
Well, let's talk about what you were up to in front of the camera in Georgia before this Black Saturday incident took place. You were continuing to feud with Brad Armstrong after wrecking poor Bullet Bob's face, and you were challenging to try and reclaim that national heavyweight title, but you'd also get involved in the TV title picture in some of the smaller markets, meaning not on television. You're taking on Ronnie Garvin in a Texas death match in Cincinnati, a lumberjack match in Grand Rapids, and a Canadian lumberjack match in Wheeling. Ted, what is the difference between a lumberjack match and a Canadian lumberjack match?
I have no idea. I think maybe Ronnie Garvin's from Canada, so maybe he wanted to call it a Canadian lumberjack match. I don't know.
That's it. I'll have to look it up. I'm sure that one of the listeners is going to know that there's some kind of a difference they put into it. Yeah. But when I asked Jake where he puts Ronnie Garvin on his list of all-time rivalries, if you can believe it, Ronnie Garvin is Jake's favorite all-time rival and a guy that Jake considers the greatest in-ring worker of all time. He also included you on that list because you were one of Jake's rivals. But it makes me wonder what you think.
And oh yeah, Ronnie Garvin was great. Oh my gosh, I totally agree with Jake. Because he was a guy who was an experienced hand when Jake and I started.
Mm-hmm.
And oh my gosh, you get in the ring with that guy, and if you don't learn something, you're stupid.
He's like 10 years older than you guys, and he'd been working in wrestling for quite a while up to this point, ever since he was a young man. So, you want to talk about experience. Ronnie Garvin had it at this point.
Oh, yeah.
And Jake and Ronnie.
Yeah, he's no plane.
Yeah, so easy to travel with, maybe scary to travel with, but easy to travel with. Jake and Ronnie had been making magic since late 1983 up to this point with their rivalry for the TV title. And the matches they were having were really vicious and bloody and nasty and kind of shoot violent at times. Were your matches with Ronnie just as violent?
I don't know that I ever had, I don't know. I don't know. I can't remember a program.
You didn't end up getting into a program with him, and that's actually the direction that this was moving in. Jake said that before Black Saturday happened, he intended to put you with Ronnie in a program as 1984 moved on. So I think you would have started challenging Ronnie for that TV title. There's a great picture out there, which I'm going to share, of Ronnie choking you with like a chain barrier that's around the ring at this time.
Yeah.
And it just you can see that these matches are pretty vicious. But again, you probably didn't get enough time with him in the ring for it to kind of get to that same bloody kind of nasty level as it did with Jake.
Yeah, I don't think so. So,
Were you aware that the plan moving forward was for you to work a program with Ronnie, or no idea what direction you were going in?
Well, I know it. I know it had been talked about. So, some things happen, some things don't.
Man, that would have been a really great one. Yourself and Ronnie in a long-term program down there. Like I said, he and Jake had just made magic, and God knows you two would have had some chemistry too.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. He was so good.
In January of this year, Hulk Hogan defeated the Iron Sheik and turned wrestling on its head. And this, of course, is after Vince pulled Hogan away from Vern Gagne's AWA, among other talents that he would tempt away from that territory. I know that promoters at the time looked at it as being really kind of underhanded by Vince to go scooping guys from other territories. And maybe it was, but Ted, you're a wrestler, so you have a different perspective than promoters. Like when Vince starts going around and kind of scooping up all the most talented people, do you view that as like, hey, it could be an opportunity down the road if Vince is going to be scooping?
Well, exactly. And again, the other thing you got to remember is Vince McMahon. He didn't just go steal the talent. He had conversations with all those promoters and said, "Hey, this is what I'm about to do. If you want to come on board and be a part of it, then please do." But none of them did because they all were, those wrestling promoters own, they own their territory, and my God, you're not going to come in here and da 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 da. Whether you don't have enough sense to look down the road and see what's happening and see where it's going, and what you could be a part of. It's more important for them to, this is mine and you can't have it.
It's silliness, and honestly, it points to the idea that these guys didn't want to change the way that they had been doing business. Vince McMahon is trying to innovate the wrestling business, and all these guys are just content to keep doing business as it had been done. And like you said, in all likelihood, wrestling would have gone away or at least diminished significantly.
Well, and I'll be honest with you, because I grew up in the business, at first, when I first heard about McMahon and what he was doing, I was mad. Yeah, I was like, what's he doing? What the hell does he think he's doing? Nah, 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 nah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my attitude changed pretty quick.
Yeah, I would think so.
Because I saw what was coming.
So I asked Jake this question, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it before I tell you what he had to say. Do you feel that Vince McMahon made Hulk Hogan, or did Hulk Hogan make Vince McMahon a success?
I think Vince would have to have, the foresight to see, okay, I can take this guy and I can make him the centerpiece of what I'm doing. Because let's go back you remember I told you the first time I went to New York?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, my last match in New York on my first run through was with Hulk Hogan before he was Hulk Hogan. And I had Hulk's first match in Madison Square Garden.
And put him over.
Yeah. And so, I think, I don't know.
So you feel that Vince McMahon positioning Hulk Hogan for success is what made Hulk Hogan so successful?
Well, no, I mean, not exactly. I mean, positioning is important, but you got to have something to offer.
Mm-hmm.
You got, you got, like now we're looking at. The other thing is the change and seeing the way, back then I was thinking old school sometimes too, and old school. Well, like Vince McMahon he's thinking about, I want my top guy to be a hero.
Mm-hmm.
I want him to be a hero because I plan on down the road getting with a toy company and making action figures and video games.
If the guy can't hold up his end of the bargain, then none of it works.
Yeah.
If you had to guess, what would you say was Jake's take on that question?
Jake would probably say, he was only as good as whoever he worked with.
Jake said that Vince could have put anybody in that position and given them that level of exposure, and they would have had the same success as Hulk Hogan. And I don't know if I agree with it or not. It's like, I think it's a good perspective.
He said what?
Jake said you could take anybody and give them the kind of exposure and opportunities that Vince was giving to Hulk Hogan, and they would have achieved the same levels of success as Hulk Hogan had, because he's like, his face was everywhere. You couldn't turn on the TV without seeing him. And that's Vince McMahon's marketing. Action figures every time you go in the store, magazines. He said the perception was that he was a hero, so he became the hero. So I don't know. I don't know if I agree with it, but what do you think?
Well, I mean, to a degree, I agree with it. I mean, it's kind of like, you're gonna, push it down their throat. I mean, but the guy's got to have something to offer, right?
Yes.
And Hulk had, what you could, he had his thing, and he lived up to it. But yeah, maybe he could. I don't know. Well. One guy, the other guy that he tried it with and it failed visibly was the Ultimate Warrior.
Yep.
He got over, but it was short lived.
His face was everywhere too, and it just didn't work. So to your point, I think that it takes the person as well to help get it over.
It takes both, yeah.
So back to Georgia. Apparently, Vince had once tried to purchase the WTBS time slot direct from Ted Turner. It was outright refused. Ted, during your time with the territory, did you ever get to spend any time with Ted Turner or interact with him?
Oh, no, never even saw him.
Okay, that's what Jake said too. He said he received a nasty letter from Ted Turner once because he spit on he blew his nose on somebody in the ring, and Turner didn't like it. But that's it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get to the part of the podcast where we really get into Black Saturday, and then I'll let you go. When Turner refused Vince, Vince did not give up, but instead came directly to the owners. Most wrestling fans know that Jim Barnett struck a deal with Vince with the approval of Jack and Jerry Briscoe, who were co-owners of the territory. On both Dark Side of the Ring and when Jerry Briscoe was a guest on my podcast with Jake the Snake Pit, Jerry stated that one of the deciding factors for him and Jack to sell was that they had not received any of their dividend money from the company. And the heat for that was on Ole Anderson, the other owner of the company, who is in control of the revenue. So, Ted, I mean, there's a lot going on behind the scenes and a lot of resentment between all of the people who are in power with Georgia. Yeah. Did you hear any of the rumblings of this, or are you just going to work and doing your job, staying the hell out of it?
I was just going to work, doing my job.
It's smart business on your part. Was there any indication that the Briscoes and Barnett were unhappy with Ole and the way he was running day-to-day operations?
If they were, of course, I wouldn't see any of that. I remember them. They came into Atlanta one time, and actually, they both stayed in my apartment.
Really?
Jack and Jerry, yeah. But I don't know. I don't remember.
Well, let's get to the big day. It's July 14th, 1984. Vince is at TV and makes it publicly known that the WWF will now be broadcast on the Superstation time slot. Ted, this is one of the craziest moments in all of wrestling. Vince McMahon all of a sudden is appearing on Georgia TV, and it's not Gordon Soley out there with him. He's got Freddie Miller out there as his announcer for the voice of Georgia. So, right out of the gate, he's getting heat with fans because all these people tuned in to see Georgia Championship Wrestling, and now Vince McMahon is there, and he's saying, "Hey, check out what we're doing up there in New York." When did it become public knowledge for talent and employees that Vince had purchased this time slot? Like, did you find out day of?
Oh, shoot, I didn't know. No, nobody would have known that until it happened. And even after it happened, and you're watching it, you're going, "Okay, who's in control?"
I mean, absolutely bonkers for something like this to happen. Imagine watching AEW TV and all of a sudden Triple H is on there and he's saying like, "Hey, here's some WWF stuff." Like it's crazy.
Yeah.
How did you react to the situation?
It didn't bother me.
You were okay with it?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't going to. It wasn't going to turn over my wagon. You
Yeah,
know,
you
and
had that deal in Japan. You were set.
I had a deal in Japan.
On the day of, Vince McMahon is here at WTBS studio. Were you at the studio that day?
I don't I don't recall.
I was gonna say maybe you had an opportunity to interact with Vince during that time. I'm not sure, but I'm guessing that it was a pretty hectic time. There's a great story out there concerning what Ole had to say to Vince and Linda McMahon on that day. Are you familiar with it?
Uh,
Apparently Vince had come up to Ole, and for perspective, Ole wasn't in on this at all. The Briscoes kind of quote unquote went behind his back, but in reality the Briscoes were frustrated and just trying to do what was right for their family. So all of a sudden Vince is there, and I think Ole's taken by surprise. And Vince comes up to him and he says, Ole, it's good to see you. This is my wife Linda. And Ole apparently said, Vince, go fuck yourself, and Linda, go fuck yourself too.
I never heard that.
It's that's straight from Ole Anderson's son on Dark Side of the Ring. That's
Yeah.
apparently the story that's been going around. So Ole, a little bit prickly, huh?
Yeah.
Well, fans from Georgia would spit this up because it wasn't the wrestling they had grown up and become used to over the years. And Vince would end up selling the time slot for $1 million, and we'd use that money to go and fund WrestleMania 1. So, man, it's crazy. Vince buys this time slot, but you've got to put a lot of respect on him for having the business savvy. He
Yeah.
gets the time slot, pulls out of it, and then uses it to completely launch the WWE.
Oh, okay. And yeah, that's the other thing. I've always said this. Vince, it sounds crazy to say this. Vince doesn't really know that much or understand that much about wrestling. What Vince is an unbelievable marketer. He knew how to take wrestling and market it like nobody else could.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if anybody else had his savvy and understanding, you think those promoters wouldn't have done just exactly what Vince did? Sure, they would have. They all would have, but they didn't because they didn't have the savvy
or the foresight. I don't think anybody was predicting the future the way that Vince McMahon was and saying like, hey, if wrestling's going to keep going and if I'm going to make as much money as humanly possible in wrestling, this is what I have to do. And again, a lot of people today might resent it, but I would be willing to guess that a lot of those people also buy WrestleMania every year whenever it comes out. And without Vince McMahon, you're not seeing it.
The other thing I realized is being one of the workers is like, when he started this thing, he'd say, okay, Georgia Championship Wrestling is now part of Vince's deal. And what I also understood is that, I might be in the eyes of a lot of people, a top hand, but I understood that at that time he had the guys that he was going to go with.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? That we're going to, you might be coming on board, but I think he had already cherry picked the guys that were going to be his main eventers. And I said, I think I'll go back to work for Bill.
So you didn't feel that New York would have been ready for Ted DiBiase in 1984? Like you would have probably been relegated to mid card despite your status.
Just knowing wrestling, it's like, okay, Vince knew who he was going to go with when he started this thing, and I said, it might be better for me, to let the first wave go and come at another time. When it first started, I grew up in the old school. This is the way wrestling, and I figured it was always going to be the same way. But you know what? It's not. And by the grace of God, I made the right choices.
Ted, your positioning in all this is wild, where it's like you didn't go with Vince right away. You'd end up going back to Bill Watts. You're doing stuff in Japan. And then at the exact right moment, you did come to the WWF with a gimmick that has you in stretch limousines and 5-star hotels and getting a stipend. honestly, just beautifully played on your part.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Oh my gosh.
You wouldn't have had it if you went with him in 1984.
I wouldn't have had that.
Absolutely wild, man.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad we got to talk about Black Saturday today. 40 years ago this week. It's absolutely crazy that it's that long ago. And yeah, please, I would encourage listeners to go back and listen to those 2 episodes of The Snake Pit. One is with Gerald Briscoe. He filled in for Jake and we talked about Black Saturday. And then recently I was on with Jake and we talked about Black Saturday. So get the full kind of definitive story from all these people who had a front row seat for wrestling history. And yeah, get that full story. And by the way, folks, there's more stories to be heard, and you can hear them over at OneTrueSportTV.com. Go and become a member. There's 3 levels of membership. We've got Contender, we've got Workhorse, but really, you want to be a traveling champion over there. Just $39.99 per month. We have special guest Q&As. We've got bonus episodes. We've got all sorts of exclusive merch and opportunities for our listeners, and we want you to be part of the community. Again, it's OneTrueSportTV.com. Get over there and become a member. Also, we're working on some new T-shirts for Ted DiBiase, and one of them is one that he never got back during his Mid-South days when he was known as the Big Cheese. We're making a shirt that says the Big Cheese, Ted DiBiase, and it's got the glove on it.
Oh my gosh.
So,
hey, the only one that's going to buy that T-shirt are they're going to be real old fans who remember when I wore the black glove and used to, load it. What'd you load that with? A bar of soap.
Ted and I were on the phone yesterday, and I asked him that question. What did you load your glove with? And go ahead, Ted. What did you tell me?
Well, it's like everybody's been to a hotel, and in a hotel they have those little bars of soap that you use. They leave you one for the sink and one for the shower. I would take one of those and take it out of the packaging, and I would take athletic tape, and I would wrap the athletic tape around that little bar of soap. And that's what I stuck in my pants, in my gear. And when I needed to knock somebody out, I took that little bar of soap out and loaded my glove.
Dude, just incredible tricks of the trade. I'm guessing most fans are seeing that and saying, like, what is that? Like a little piece of metal he's got or something? And here, tricks of the trade, folks. It's a little bar of soap. You can get all those stories and more coming up. Please check out OneTrueSport.com for all the new Ted DiBiase merchandise. And again, it's OneTrueSportTV.com to become a member with our network. And Ted, we'll be back next week. And next week, we are back with another episode of Ask Ted Anything.
I'm here. I'm there. I'm everywhere. So
I can't wait for you, man.
Okay, buddy. So, hey, are we saying sayonara? Yeah.
I think we're gonna go ahead and sign off, but I don't know. It feels like maybe there's a certain way to do that.
Well, yeah. As always, I just have to remind everybody, and I'm going to remind you every time you come on this show and you watch the show. At the end of the show, you're always going to be reminded of this: that everybody's got a price for the $1 Million Man.
We'll get you guys next time right here on Everybody's Got a Pod.
$1 Million dream, tell them all good night. Everybody's got a pod, everybody's